an understanding very complex movement systems. Like the human being looks like it's really complex, but it's not. We are like an iPad, and the technology is so good that all you need to know is how to swipe it on and swipe it off. You don't need to know how the glass interfaces with the battery. That's the mistake. The problem is everyone's trying to figure out how the software runs with the off switch, and you don't need to know that. You just need to know how to use the iPad, how to turn it on and off and charge it. Yeah. And one of the things that we're really trying to say is we want to simplify movement systems, especially in this very classic sort of language of movement, which is just most of the things that we're doing every day. Picking kids up, running, maybe lifting some weights. One of the ways we do that, simplify that, is that we organize the spine, and we talked a lot about the specifics of that. But what we try to do is really simplify the motion around the spine. So in swimming, for example, if you see me put my arm over my head and my back breaks and I create a hinge, then all of a sudden, this isn't a single engine lever system. What's happening is I'm creating multiple shoulders or multiple hinges. I want to try to maintain a good neutral position and then have that shoulder function around it. Around the spine, like we talked about, if you sit down and instead of having a single joint of rotation, the hip is designed to handle enormous loads of flexion and extension. The world record in squat is nearly 1,300 pounds. Andy Bolton, has the, he technically doesn't have the world record deadlift, but in my book, Andy Bolton does because of the mysterious bars and federations and all that stuff. Yeah. But it's over 1,200 pounds, and what's amazing, I think it's like 1,245, is that his back doesn't change position. It looks like there's just a little movement in his knee, and then he just stands up with the weight. And so we take this very complex system of lifting up over 1,000 pounds off the ground, and yet all you see is basically him moving his hip joint. And so one of the ways that we look at these complex systems, and people can relate, is men's gymnastics on the rings. It's like, how difficult is that? It's so difficult, but look how simple it is. All the guy's doing is moving around through a single joint of rotation. And once you understand how difficult it is to isolate that, but every bend in the wrist or the elbow or in the shoulder or the neck is sort of lost efficiency. So when we're running, what we're really looking for is I shouldn't see the tail wagging the dog. When I'm swimming, I shouldn't see the tail wagging the dog. When I'm squatting, I shouldn't see these wobbles in the spine. That should be rigid. So as we start to solve these mechanical problems, what we're doing is we're organizing the spine first, making sure that we're organized at the primary engines of the hip and the shoulder second, and then if we see a deviation in the spine, that's what we fix first. That's the thing. So yes, you may have to squat higher and lighter, we understand, but you're not actually squatting or performing what we're trying to do. You are just writing checks that your body can't cash. So that's sort of what the single joint rule is. We want to put those flexion and extension loads and avoid the hinge loads that we see that are so damaging to the spine and leak so much pain. The sort of laws of torque, I think, was the next piece. Yeah. And what we know is that the body is designed to create stability with rotation. Especially in the primary engines of the hip and shoulder, but also through all of them. And the example is a collapsed arch tends to impinge the foot. But if you screw your feet into the ground like they're on dinner plates, your arch comes back alive, you unimpinge your ankle, the Achilles tracks, right, and you end up in a good position. Well, the same thing happens with the knee and even in the hip and the shoulder, kind of the same examples down. So if you're listening, imagine if you slump your shoulders in. If I slump my shoulders in, what that basically does, watch what happens to your hands. It collapses your hands. And so one of the reasons we're seeing all of this carpal tunnel and RSI dysfunction in people is that we adopt this pattern at our desk when my shoulders round, which challenges my nervous system, but then I also collapse the physical tunnel that is my wrist. Because I internally rotate, the tunnel flattens. If I externally rotate, get myself into a mechanically stable position, I automatically will reclaim a normal tunnel and I don't flatten and challenge those nerves further. So, imagine that every cue we basically see around the gym, I feel like can sort of be divided into two categories. The first category is stiffness category. Squeeze your butt, get tight, belly in, big breath, right? Belly button, sphincter, head through. These are all cues around organizing the spine. And the second cue is about this rotation. And specifically, we talk about, break the bar, knees out, armpit forward, my good catch position. What people have really figured out around technique is that they're coaching positions that create mechanical stability. So if you take your fist and put it inside your shirt and pull on it, you'll never get it very tight. But if you wind it up like a candy, it gets very stiff very fast. And that's basically what's happening in your joint capsule. That's why you have a rotator cuff in your hip and a rotator cuff in your shoulder. So when we say screw your feet into the ground, or if you're bench pressing, break the bar, when I break the bar, what I really am doing is creating a torque force. When I teach kids to tackle with their thumbs up and elbows in, I'm putting the shoulder into a mechanically stable position. And so everyone should identify that the opposite of that, if I do a push-up and my shoulders flare out, I'm basically putting myself into a mechanically disadvantageous position, and that's why I ended up with a torn rotator cuff and a pinched shoulder. So I go from stable to unstable. And I think when people have that sort of concept of this rotational stability, which no one really talked about in explicit terms, it was all couched in the language of coaching. And then, in physical therapy, we assess range of motion. I need to have the thumb back to have full range of motion. Well, that's really about saying that you're not full range of motion if you can put your arm over your head. You're full range of motion if you can have the thumb all the way back, express the rotation, and arm up overhead. That's normal range of motion. So I think what's happened is we haven't really given people the language of what full range of motion is. If you squat down with your feet together, all the way down to the ground, like you're having by a fire, feet together, heels on the ground, you'll notice that your knees go out. The knees going out automatically is your body rotating the ankle into a stable position and creating stability in the hip. Standing position in yoga is called Tadasana, feet straight, screwing the feet into the ground. Concept is why when you read Thomas Meyer's anatomy trains, there are these spiral lines of fascia in the body that automatically cause this. And so if you lay down at the beach, I know you're in the UK, but there are these places with sun called the beach. And if you lay down and your feet fall out, what you're seeing is you're unwinding those patterns automatically. That's why we stand with feet straight. So that's the second rule.